Hi, I'm Leanpub from Leanpub, and in this episode of the Front Matter podcast, I'll be interviewing Gojko Adzic. Based in south of London, Gojko is a former product development consultant and prolific author who is currently working in the products Narrowkit and MindMap, and he's also a frequent keynote speaker at leading software development conferences. You can follow him on Twitter at Gojko Adzic and check out his website at gojko.net and search YouTube for numerous videos of his past talks. Gojko is the author of the book Lizard Optimization, Unlock Product Growth by Engaging Long-Tail Users. In the book, Gojko introduces readers to a technique for designing product development experiments by engaging long-tail users that seem to follow some unexplainable lizard logic. In this interview, we're going to talk about Gojko's background and career, professional interests, his book, and at the end, we'll talk a little bit about his experience as an author. So thank you very much, Gojko, for being on the Leanpub Front Matter podcast.
Thank you for inviting me to kind of do the podcast again. I have to write more books more frequently so I can appear on your podcast again.
Yeah, it's funny. I always like to start these interviews by talking to people about their origin story, but you were on the podcast once almost 5 years ago now. So people will put a link in the show notes to that original episode. But I was wondering if you could maybe begin by talking a little bit about what you've been up to in the last 5 years or so and the big career change that you've had in that time.
Yeah, I kind of started really enjoying developing again, I felt. We used to do a lot of consulting through kind of me and my colleagues, and then kind of started building products on the side really to keep us sanity when working in large organizations as consultants. And some of these products took off, and now I'm spending most of my time developing again. And Narrowkit is something I've been working on since 2018, on and off. And it really took off a couple of years ago. It has had 9 million active users last year. And I don't know if I should be kind of proud or crazy to say this, but I'm the only developer, tested product person, support person, and barista in the company.
Yeah, I'm actually really curious to talk to you about that. So could you talk a little bit about what Narrowkit is and how it got started and what it turned into?
Yeah, Narrowkit is a tool that helps people create narrated videos and text-to-speech audio very easily. One way to think about it is like convert a PowerPoint lecture into a video and publish on your YouTube channel very, very quickly, or convert a book into an audiobook very quickly. And it uses the latest text-to-speech neural engines to produce almost human output. The technology is so good now that, the English that the machine produces is better than my English. I still have this kind of Eastern European Bond villain accent I can't get rid of. And it started as a way for me to scratch my own itch. Another product that I've built with a couple of colleagues about 10 years ago is a collaboration tool. It's an online mind mapping tool, and I was doing the instructional videos for it. And I'm not a professional voice actor, so it took me about 2 or 3 hours to do a 10-minute recording, and I really hated the experience, plus, editing the video and things like that. So I thought, I'm a developer, I'm good at automating shit. Why don't they automate this? And I built this Bash script that would kind of automatically create videos from Markdown. I was actually a bit inspired by Leanpub doing books from Markdown to decide to build videos from Markdown. And, put some images, put some screenshots, and everything goes automatically into a video. And then when I did it, I realized I could build, it took me a couple of hours to make a 10-minute video. Now it takes me 20 minutes to make a 10-minute video. So I thought other people might kind of enjoy this as well. And that was kind of the first version of the product. And then it kind of found its audience in something totally different. To a large extent, by looking at what people are doing that I did not really understand with the product, what the crazy people are doing. Well, every time I think, well, users are dumb for doing this, I was using that as kind of feedback about the UX, or as a signal to improve the product. And it just kind of amazingly took off. So I'm very proud how it's developing.
And so what are most people using it for now?
Lots of people are using it to produce voicemail messages, to produce ebooks to produce social media content. People are using it to create IVR, call center response systems, lots of HR and kind of internal e-learning videos are being produced, compliance videos, instructional demo videos, like weird stuff. I mean, it's it's grown in ways that I could have never predicted.
That's just so fantastic. So you just reminded me of something very funny. So one of Gojko's books, for anyone watching or listening, is Humans versus Computers. It's a really great book. It's about how sort of the way we use computers the ways we use them can go wrong because of built-in things to processes. And so when you said about call center, so I have to share this story with you. So a while ago, my mom bought me a birthday present, and she bought it on Amazon, and it came through. Sometimes when you buy things on Amazon, it's very smooth. Other times it's kind of some crazy company that's sort of, just set themselves up and they're delivering packages and stuff. And so I started getting these weird texts that were totally garbled and weird and looked like totally like spam. But then in my apartment building in the lobby, there was a note for me, and it was like, oh, it was clearly connected to these spammy messages I'd got. So, okay, fine. They're just not very good with their tech or whatever. And there was a number to call on the note. So I called the number. And so now the fact that I'm based in Canada becomes relevant here. So in Canada, often they're with voice kind of responses and automated kind of messaging systems and stuff, you need to have an English and a French version. So normally what they'll do is they'll say for, responses in English, press 1, for responses in French, press 2. So I call this number and it says in English, we're sorry, we're unable to accept calls from unauthorized numbers at this time, or something like that. It was just basically like they have a number to call. They've got an automated message set up to make it seem like they're actually doing call center support when they weren't. That's clearly what it was. But anyway, so then it says, we are sorry, we are unable to accept calls from unauthorized numbers at this time. And like, I'm not exaggerating. Like, I listened to it again. It was in a Clouseau French accent, an Inspector Clouseau accent.
Absolutely brilliant.
And it was because, they clearly told their AI or whatever, we need a French version. So it did a version in a French accent instead of in French.
There was I think a research in England a while ago. We're talking about like 60s, 70s, where they said the favorite French actor in England was Peter Sellers.
Yeah.
Inspector Clouseau. So Clouseau will survive in many ways.
I know.
Yeah.
It's just so funny. But yes, these I just bring that up because it was funny. It reminded me of your book and stuff like that. But the uses that these tools are made of, I mean, you started doing it to scratch your own itch to, make it easier to make product help videos. And then now people are using it for, their voice messaging, automated voice messaging responses and stuff. And I mean, I guess if one wants to draw a through line, it's all about helping people.
Yeah. I mean, it's I think if you look at how much content we're all producing now, everybody's producing content, and lots of people are not good at producing content, but they have to do it because their work put them in that environment. So lots of people I speak with, users are domain experts in a company where they have to create a video now explaining how to use some kind of machine, or HR people who now have to explain to people how to, go and register for whatever HR processes they need to do. And almost nobody has a professional microphone. They don't have good cameras. They don't have good video editing skills. They don't have good audio editing skills. They don't like the sound of the voice. But we still need to produce this content. And I think what Narakit is helping people do is actually suck less at producing content and produce reasonably good content very quickly. I very much liked Kathy Sierra's book, Badass, and I use references from that book a couple of times in the book. And she talks about this kind of suck zone where people feel really, really discouraged by technology because they're not good at it. And if they get stuck in this suck zone, they never escape it. That's kind of the most dangerous place for a product. And I think what I've tried to do from day one is help people escape that suck zone when they need to create different types of content.
Yeah, that's really great. I hadn't heard that term before, but I'm very familiar with the feeling of the being in the suck zone and putting people in it too. So that's curious. Actually, that reminds me. So one thing you mentioned too. So you sort of like one of the way I always talk about, like, so sort of I sit on top of Leanpub customer support, and the way I've always sort of explained it is like, there was a period of time when we sort of like very smart person, but we sort of put an employee on it. And then after a couple of months, we're like, what are we doing? This isn't us. We don't treat customer support that way. And so I jumped on the grenade, and my whole approach to it was like every single interaction with the person is a sign of something wrong that we can fix, or something new that we can build or should think about building for them. And so treat every interaction with a customer as a systemic issue. And if you do that, you end up with a product that just works for people. And then so you can have one person serving 9 million users all around the world.
Okay, I think the big reason why you did that is because Leanpub is self-funded. You don't have venture capital to burn. You don't have, people playing politics and a head of QA wanting to have 50 testers, or a head of support wanting to have 55 support people to prove that they're more important in the company. And I think, as you said, this idea of handling every interaction as a learning event is really interesting. There's like two different forces there for me in terms of like product development. One is really the thing that the guys from Y Combinator talk about, where early on you should do things that don't scale. Don't try to optimize the product for 1 million users. Do it manually, as you said. Put an employee on it, and that doesn't scale. You cannot handle 1 million people in support like that.
No.
But use that as a learning opportunity. And I'm launching both of these products. I've done a ton of stuff that just doesn't scale. Keep manually handling invoicing until I figured out what the invoice needs to look like, and all the kind of edge cases there. And I've even kind of looked at. When I launched the API, I've kind of monitored what people are doing on the API to see what kind of mistakes they're making, and then sending them an email and saying, hey, you've been getting these errors because you are using the parameter in this way, and you should be using it in that way. That doesn't scale, but then these are things that we use as learning opportunities. However, you have to use it as a learning opportunity to build the product better.
Exactly.
And I think the disconnect that happens in some organizations is you just keep throwing people at the problem, where the problem has become well-defined, systematic, and systematized. And I think the other thing that's kind of really interesting there is when people contact you, or me, or as anybody who's kind of has a skin in the game, our role and our responsibilities to really help them, and then help themselves, and have a product that's kind of better at serving them. And I think looking at this, one of kind of the really interesting concepts that stuck with me from the research I've done for the book after I tried to start systematizing my knowledge is this idea from Kat Holmes, who published a book called Mismatch, where she talks about the mismatch between users' abilities, expectations, whatever, and the product. It's it might be a bug or it might not be a bug. It doesn't really matter at the end of the day. There's a mismatch between what people want and what the product does. And then if you're in a big corporation, you can say, well, it's a bug. Let's put it into bug triage, and then somebody decides it's not important enough and whatnot. But if you want to help the users, then the product has to do it better. And for MindLab, we ended up exactly in the situation, as you said, there were only two of us. We were doing it as a side gig. It started growing. I can't keep responding to customer emails. The only thing we can do is improve the product. So we treated every single email as a UX error.
Yep.
And is it a technical problem or a business problem? I don't care. It's an error. I need to get a user to kind of proceed with that. And I've read this, we can talk about this for micro self-funded companies, but the way kind of I've heard this idea really played back to me from a friend was Jeff Bezos at Amazon said that basically people shouldn't be talking to their vendors, they should be talking to their friends. And every time they get a customer service call, they use it as a way of figuring out why did this interaction have to happen at all. What's wrong with the product to cause this kind of interaction? And then, it's a problem with the product. And going back to kind of, the idea of mismatches, Kat Holmes talks about inclusive design and accessibility and disabilities and things like that. But I think this idea, has legs in a much wider context. Because if you think about a user complaining about something, that could be, I'm a consultant in my head still, so I think about quadrants. It could be because the product does something you expected to do or didn't expect to do as a product person, and it could be that the product does something the user expected or didn't expect to do. So if the product does something that you didn't want it to do and the user didn't expect to do, that's a straight bug. That's, a problem. But then the more interesting categories are kind of the diagonal ones where the product does something you wanted, but it's not what the user expected.
Yes. Yeah. No, exactly.
And the other opposite as well. The product does something the user expected, you didn't want it. It's an exploit. It's a way of getting something that you didn't want to offer, or maybe you need some other feedback. And I think for me, I've learned to do lots and lots of research on building products, but research can only tell you stuff about your current audience or what you think your audience is. But when the product grows, as Neverkit grew 500 times in 12 months, the audience changes, and that means people's preferences change, people's problems change. Over time, your audience changes. You've done your research. You launched Leanpub 10 years ago or even more.
Yeah.
People's preferences change. They might no longer want to read PDFs or EPUBs. They might want to consume content in some other way. And all this stuff, I think, is really interesting when we start looking at what are the unexpected things people are doing with our software.
So that's the thing. That's one of the things I love the most about your book is it's systematizing a way of sort of accepting the fact that we have blind spots, and that other people do too. And that, you just reminded me of how the subtleties of being aware of there's things you don't know that you don't know, basically, about your users and about yourself. And just to pick a dramatic example, not from business, but when this happened to me a few years ago where I encountered someone in my apartment building and I said something about the local, cricket oval. And I must have used a racist keyword, because this person then responded to me as though I was part of his racist group or whatever, and just went on this rant. And I was like, whoa, I have no idea what I said, but it's just this reminder that so for example, when you talk about your audience and who's coming to you, I'm not saying they're necessarily racist or whatever, but there can be things about your messaging, there can be things about your product that are attracting people of a certain kind. And you might be like, why are these people coming here, and do I want them or do I not want them?
Absolutely. Some people you absolutely don't want. Some people you want, and you don't even know what's going on until kind of you figure out what's unexpected. I mean, one example from Leanpub that is a quite extreme version of that is we and this is again, looking at unexpected things. When you have product metrics, everybody has metrics these days, but metrics mostly look at what you expect. You look at when people are downloading books, whether they're publishing books and things like that. You build metrics around things you expect. Very, very rarely do people build metrics around things you don't expect. And that's, for me, the big lesson. I was optimizing kind of search engine stuff and wanted to bring more people in. And one of the kind of web pages really took off. And I was quite happy about that. And for the product usage, the key metric for me was whether people are converting audio files or converting files to video and converting files to audio. So, Valentine's Day, couple of years ago, for whatever insane reason, the usage doubles from 100,000 tasks per day. The usage doubles to 200,000 tasks per day. So my first thinking is it's a bug in metrics. Nobody has twice the growth in a single day. And I start looking at the metrics. I can't figure out anything wrong. I even list task IDs. They're all unique task IDs. My second thought is I have a bug in the software that's getting people to submit the same task twice. Retries, whatever.
Mm-hmm.
No, it's okay. It's unique content. Right then, you just all of a sudden we've doubled our product usage. That's amazing. And the next day, it doubles again. And it's like, with these, I can see growth. I'm ready to pop up with the champagne. And then I look at, because it's a premium product, you get people to use. People get the free tier. They should upgrade to a commercial tier. And when the number of free users and commercial users are kind of balanced, it's okay because the commercial users are paying for the free users to use it. Unfortunately, you have such rapid growth, and it's a self-funded product where I'm starting to think if it keeps doubling, I don't have money to pay for this. There's all this audience that's coming. I need to figure out how to pay for the operational costs now. Because if it keeps doing it like that for another 10 days, that's it. So I'm not going to be able to wait for people to upgrade to pay for all the increased usage. And then I start digging into what's going on and analyzing the data, and pretty much nobody's upgrading. All these people are just using the free tier and using the free tier and using the free tier until they can use it to the end. And like 99.9% of the new people are coming from India. So, we start looking at payment analytics. There's lots of reasons why Indian people can't pay with cards and things like that. The Indian National Bank causes problems for that. Even in normal days, payment acceptance rates from India are quite low for me, but this was even worse. So the people aren't even trying to pay. So now it's a totally different audience. Something's going on, and then I've decided, look, I've just run out of money. So the first thing I did is just geo-blocked India to kind of figure out what's going on.
Yeah.
And the usage dropped a bit the next day. It just exploded all over the world. And people from all over the world are all of a sudden building Hindi videos and Hindi audio files.
Right.
So it's kind of the same group of people again, just VPNs.
Yeah.
So I block VPNs, and then the whole thing stabilizes a bit. Now the problem is, I start getting hundreds and hundreds of emails from people where the thing no longer works, and it's telling them VPNs are temporarily blocked. They, crazy stuff. So one guy sent me an email that he is very spiritual and he cannot use an internet connection without a VPN because he's too spiritual for that.
Right.
I get an email from an insurance company in India where they're saying they've been using the product for months or something like that. It's critical for their business to use it. And I say, okay, what's your account number? What's your IP address? And they give me the IP address and they say, we don't have an account. We've been using it for free. So, well, it's not exactly very nice of you, is it? You're an insurance company. You should be paying for something that's critical for your business.
Yeah.
So But then I kind of, my next thinking is, yes, we do get some of these kind of, people that were using it for free and hiding an IP address to trick the usage. But then I get an email. It makes no sense. It's from one of these throwaway email services with kind of all, restore my access at once. I demand, and throwaway email. Tomorrow another throwaway email, very similar structured email. I recognize it, restore my access, I've paid. I'm like, okay, somebody actually claims that they paid. This email doesn't match an account, it's throw email. I can't respond to it. I try to respond saying, give me your account name so I can check what's going on. The email bounces, of course, because it's a throwaway thing. And then a day later, an email comes from a Gmail address, says, again, the same thing, I've paid. They say, okay, I look, I can't find you in the system. I understand you paid. You email me from a throwaway email address. Help me find you in the system to figure out what's going on. And this person's actually been quite a heavy user, but they're paranoid. They're using throwaway email addresses and VPNs and things like that. And I realized, look, that's something that I have not expected. I never considered that category of users. So, like your, example with, do we want this audience? Do we not want this audience? Do I want insurance companies to use my product for free, for unlimited? No. Do I want people to pay me and use it over a VPN? Why not? Why would I be preventing that?
Mm-hmm.
So, but I don't want this whole kind of thing to explode. So what I've done is actually allowed VPN usage only for commercial accounts. And if you're connecting through a VPN, it gives you a really nice message saying, hey, to prevent it use, you cannot use the free tier from a VPN, connect directly. But, pay and use a VPN, no problem at all. And what happened, actually, we finished that month with a 25% revenue increase. Because there were people who were using it through VPNs, hiding their IP address, they were able to abuse the free tier. But then, they decided to pay. And I think that's kind of part of this, figuring out what's the unexpected thing there. And then, at the end, just to kind of finish off the story of why it exploded, I kind of started trying to figure out what happened. And somebody figured out how to abuse the free tier and published a popular YouTube video. And I saw this video where I don't understand Hindi. I can't figure out anything there, but I scroll through the video, and at some point he starts talking about, VPN. It's like, yeah, okay, I knew people could abuse it over a VPN. I never thought it's going to be such a big problem where, it can run out of money because people are abusing it. And at the end, again, that's one very, very interesting feature that is a way for people to pay. There was a lovely book I read called Product-Led Growth. Again, one of these systematizations of things that have been happening for a while. And in Product-Led Growth, Wes Bush talks about a growth strategy and a sales strategy that's kind of different from typical, we're going to have salespeople call and spam and send emails, from a self-serve flywheel where a product sells itself. And then systematizes that and how kind of that works in different situations. And one of the really interesting things for me in that systematization is how they start thinking about what's the point where people start paying for your software products. And they kind of tie it in, again, with Katie Sierra's work in Badass, and how you have these beginner problems. And then you have advanced problems and expert problems. And when you help people solve beginner problems, they start trying to solve intermediate problems and expert problems with your software. And that's kind of the point, that kind of graduation where they've solved a beginner problem, they want to solve an advanced problem. That's where you're likely to get people to upgrade. So from my product perspective, building a short audio, building a short video, these are beginner problems. People are not going to pay for that. But, doing this at scale while you're hiding your IP address, that's no longer a beginner task. That's a different thing. And putting that behind a paywall both helped me prevent abuse, but also, allowed revenue to grow and allow the product to grow while, people who need that still can do it instead of me just blocking a whole subcontinent.
Yeah, that's just a brilliant story. There's so many kind of like, the battle hardened kind of responses and learning going on there. That's just amazing. Actually, just before we go on to talk about your book, Lizard Optimization, and what lizards are, I wanted to reach back there to what that point you made. Someone pretty clearly being dishonest about how they're spiritual, so they can only use a VPN.
I don't think they were being dishonest. I think they were actually being honest.
Yeah, so they might be, and I just for the listeners, I just wanted to say, like, we've got a concept of a magic sign-in link, a magic link that you can use to sign into Leanpub. So, basically, like, people might use Medium or what have you. There's lots of services that do this. Now, if you want to sign in, they send you an email with a link to your email address, and you signs you into the product. So we had a guy contact us saying, you really shouldn't be messing around with magic. And it's like, and it was very interesting. I mean, to me, definitely, it's like kind of like this guy's going to be one in a million, but like it's fascinating to think about like that. Like we just take it for granted that we use this word magic, and like actually there is going to be some proportion of people, and like you talk about this, but this is where the lizard comes in. There's going to be some proportion of people who have a very strange, from your perspective, reaction to basically everything you do.
Absolutely. And the thing there is that for every person that contacts you, there's probably 100 of them that just kind of, give up or not even try to contact you, get confused, or so fixing it for this person isn't just helping that person, it's helping probably 100 times more people that you don't even know that they're stuck in that problem.
Yeah.
And I think one of and this goes back to kind of monitoring and observability and things like that, I think the push to distributed computing that happened last 10, 15 years, we've learned how to expect the unexpected from our infrastructure. That your microservice can die in some weird way, or that the website can be offline. So we've kind of invested in building observability tools that show us when we have a technical exception. And then we deal with these things. But it's very, very rare that people are doing this from a kind of user perspective or a business perspective. And for me, that's one of the biggest lessons, kind of building Narrowkit was because I started with the technical exceptions and I started catching business exceptions. And then I realized that there's a lot more feedback here, that it's a lot more interesting to look at the business stuff. And now I have, for example, there's a screen where you can upload documents to be converted to audio. You can upload a Word document, an Excel spreadsheet, all the standard stuff. But if people select something that's not supported by the system, the software shows them a nice error message saying, look, you've selected this. You selected the JPEG file. Like, I can't read the JPEG file. It's, but in addition to just showing that, I get metrics about that.
Right.
And that helped me build one of the most profitable features in the system, because people were selecting subtitle files, and a reasonable percentage of users were selecting subtitle files. I never expected that. And the system was showing them like, okay, this is an unsupported file type. But when I realized, okay, that people are selecting subtitle files, maybe I should be supporting it in a product. You uploaded a subtitle, and then I got it wrong the first time around. I thought people want to read the text and ignore the timestamps. But then I started getting feedback from users that, oh, this is, it's not matching the timestamps. And I'm like, yeah, of course, I'm, not expected that. So I've built it to kind of automatically align with the timestamps in the subtitle files. And this turns out is like a gold mine for people who are doing e-learning videos in their organizations, because they have a video in English, they have to translate it to 50 other languages. and they want the audio to match the video. They don't want to re-edit the video to match the audio.
Right.
And just by kind of exporting a subtitle file, giving it to Nerkit, they get an audio in French, Spanish, Hebrew, whatever, that matches this. It saves hours and hours and hours of video editing and audio editing for somebody who could kind of even, manually do it before. And it's not a large percentage of the users that need that, but those that need it really, really need it. And it's one of the kind of very interesting things that came out as a result of basically me monitoring to see what's the unexpected thing.
Right. Yeah. No, that's a really interesting, tying in the kind of like, the way that this can, we can think of it on a sort of like interacting with users and users interacting with you, but like the business exception. And then there's sort of like very sophisticated stuff about like shift to cloud computing and the way we're using that and the sort of acceptance that we need to look for, which is why your book is so good, because it's about engaging with these different dimensions, but with the same kind of like point of view about there's going to be these lizards kind of there. And so I was wondering if you could just shift to talking specifically about your book. Why the word lizard? Where does that concept come from?
So it comes from this Lizardman's constant. And Lizardman's constant is something defined by Scott Alexander in the Star Slate Codex blog. Basically said 4% of the people are just going to do random shit that you will never be able to explain. And so the Lizardman's constant is 4%. He backs it up with some research. And one of the things he backs it up is this survey they've done where they try to mix demographic data with some psychological evaluation. So they will try to see if whether you are American or Canadian and whether you live here or there would affect how you psychologically kind of look at different things. And then they had this kind of weird stuff where somebody entered American as gender and bizarre things, and they couldn't really figure out why people would do that. And then they realized, okay, part of this is that some people don't understand the question. Part of it is that some people are distracted. They've read the previous question. Part of this is, some people just have thicker thumbs, and then on a small screen they select the wrong drop down, and there's a million reasons why. But part of your audience is doing stuff you can't explain, and it's as if humans are not doing it. It's some kind of weird other logic, and then he kind of pairs it up with some other survey where they figured that 4% of the people believe that lizard men are running the US. So some weird stuff. And again, it's not actually 4%. It's kind of much smaller, but the other people have selected that answer for other weird reasons. Maybe, they just want to see what happens. Maybe they're malicious. Maybe they didn't understand the question, or maybe they didn't understand the answer, or whatever. And out of that comes this kind of 4%. Now, what's interesting is if you want to look at growth, like it is said, people doing weird things, the product, if 4% of your users are contacting you every day to help them, you're stuck. You can't do anything else. But if you make the product better for those people so they can self-service, then it grows and it helps the audience grow other things. So I kind of started, whenever kind of these weird, bizarre things happen, and with 9 million users, weird, bizarre things happen every day. And I couldn't explain it to myself. I've realized maybe, I should think about this as it's not human logic, it's some lizard logic, like this Lizardman constant.
Right.
And there's a kind of comic relief when you think to yourself, like, see, this is not done by a human, it's not done by a lizard, but then try to figure out what's going on. So lizards in this kind of also combines with the Gauss distribution and the normal curve. And when people talk about the long tail, and all these things are a very long tail of statistical distributions, then I started imagining, lizards have tails. So it's a long tail, it's a lizard, it's not a human.
Yeah, no, that's really good. And one thing it makes me, the thing that occurred to me was, the idea of the lizard man, for people who haven't heard of this idea, is that I think it probably comes from from some old sci-fi, but there was a mini series that was very popular on TV in the States, and I think it was the 80s, called V.
Oh yeah, I watched that.
And so these aliens, these human looking aliens arrive on Earth, and they're being very friendly, as I recall, and stuff like that. But then there's this big reveal where one of them kind of takes off their face and they're a lizard underneath. Whether there's, I'm sure there's stories predating V where that kind of thing is true, but that's in the popular imagination. That's probably where the kind of cult idea that there's these politicians who are actually these lizard people. And one of the things that I think about a lot, probably because I interact with so many people just like you're describing, and like there's these mysteries every day, is like we are all, we in our common sense everyday heuristic, we talk about ourselves and think about ourselves like we're all the same. But we're actually, as it were, underneath, we actually are all very different from each other. And keeping that in mind when you're interacting with people, that they might be like completely different emotional platform that they are, or way of thinking, or things they've read, or people they talk to and stuff like that. Just how radically different we are from each other is something that comes up when you interact with enough people and they interact with your product.
Marty Kagan in Inspired wrote that kind of one of the most common mistakes product managers make is think that they represent the user, and think that kind of their experience matches the user experience and things like that. And I think as a product management community, we've learned to do research now, because we can't represent the user and we can't predict what the users are going to do. But then I said, even when you do research, kind of there's gaps, there's other things you've missed, and it might be because of the way you did research, or it might be because you've interviewed what you think your audience is today, or it might be because your audience is now this, and then 5 years from now the audience is going to be different, or things like that. And all these things have like incredible impact on how we can grow the product. And we like for this text to speech thing. So I've done a ton of research, but I've interviewed people who I can talk to. So, I speak Serbian and English. I had to talk to people who can speak English. And I've not really interviewed people that don't speak English when I was doing this. And then doing monitoring, I've kind of figured out that lots of these weird API errors were happening. And they were happening in some kind of totally insane way that I could not reproduce at all. And it was like the content of the website that people were using was not what I was using, and I built the website, so I thought we were hacked. And kind of tried to dig deeper into this and put more monitoring, and then I realized that kind of lots and lots of people were using the product with automatic translation turned on. And that's not normally an issue, but it's an issue because Google's automated translator was translating some configuration JSON files as well.
Wow.
And the values that were being picked from these kind of configuration files were being centrally translated rather than config variables that should never be translated. Now, whose bug is it? Is it Google's bug? Of course it's Google's bug. Do I call Google and say, look, your translation is translated JSON files you shouldn't be doing? Pointless. Do I want to help my users use it in that context? Why not? And then kind of, I spent a bit of time figuring out how to make the website work well when it's automatically translated. Again, it unlocked a significant amount of growth. I would have never caught that in research because I did not talk to people who don't speak English. That's my limitation of doing research. And
right.
Again, these things, you can only, there's whatever kind of research you do, there's some blind spots that whether, it's your assumptions or the audience or whatever, and doing monitoring for problems, figuring out how people are using your software in ways you never expected, helps kind of complement that research with feedback so we can improve our products. And that's kind of the essence of lizard optimization.
Yeah, no, that's very well put, and gives me the perfect sort of podcast guest opportunity to segue into the last part of the interview where we talk about your process as an author. And I was wondering if you could talk a little bit about how you're marketing this book.
Well, I speak at a lot of conferences. So, my way of marketing books is kind of to go to conferences and talk about things that overlap with the book, but are interesting for the audience as well. I do, I've been collecting people's emails for a very long time. Kind of, I started writing books in 2007. So I do have a kind of a decent mailing list as well, but at the same time, people's preferences changed. People don't read email anymore. I'm marketing the book through the website and through kind of, I guess, yes, social media as well. But because I've been building my own product for such a long time, all my social media profiles are a bit stale now, unfortunately.
And did you hire a PR person as well for marketing?
No, actually, kind of, I did that. I think we talked about this last time. For Humans versus Computers, actually paid a very expensive PR agency as an experiment.
Right. I'm remembering that now.
The at least for that type of book, I think the result was a net negative. I don't think they've contributed anything valuable there.
Yeah, it's interesting. I was talking to an author just the other day who had a very similar experience.
I think, either I don't know how to make it work or it doesn't work. But I would probably think it's kind of me not knowing how to make it work, or kind of just this stuff not being important enough. I think, for me, writing a book is a way of dumping my short-term cache of ideas into something and systematizing it and forcing myself to do research. I know this kind of is a bit kind of self-referential, but once you publish books regularly, kind of the previous books sell the new book as well. So, and a nice thing about that is, having Leanpub put all the books in a kind of also by this author as well. So the new book sells the old books. And I think that gets a kind of a bit of a self-flywheel as well.
Oh, big time. I mean, that's, in the self-publishing blogosphere or what have you, the whole idea of like, I mean, it's daunting when you're starting out to think about that, but there will come a time if you keep at it when you will have 4 or 5 or 6 books. They all help sell each other. People might find out about one book and not buy that, but they'll buy the other one and stuff like that, which is just amazing.
I think one thing that I figured with the books, since impact mapping, and this is, by the way, the kind of
there it is.
Lizard optimization it came today.
Awesome.
I need to kind of look at it a bit and then approve it for distribution. So the book is in an unusual format. It's in a square format. So in a bookshelf, it sticks out.
Right.
Sticks out from the other books. It's usually books for professionals don't have illustrations in this style, so it kind of sticks out as well. So getting it to stick out visually, getting it to be noticeable is also very interesting. And again, I've definitely seen this effect where I was visiting companies as a consultant, and I see the bookshelf there, and kind of my books stick out, and then people see them and pick them up, and people have told me that, they've picked them up randomly because just they were there standing out from the rest.
That's really awesome.
So, yeah.
It reminds me, one of the, if listeners have ever wondered why there's certain kind of like novels suddenly were like this fat, it was because they took up more shelf space and in the bookstore and A, made them more visible, but B, crowded out the other books. And so if people want to know how the book, like a little sort of detail about the book business.
Yeah, why Game of Thrones is kind of, this thing. So
people think about the shape and size of things a lot, and it's very important. The last question, I mean, congratulations, by the way, on the new book. It's just so good, and it's so great to actually see the physical copy there as well. The last question I always ask on the podcast, if the guest is a Leanpub author, is if there was one thing about Leanpub when you're using it that has you shaking your fist, going, damn you, Leanpub, or if there was one magical feature we could build for you, can you think of it?
That's very interesting. You know, I like Leanpub is a dream come true for me. Because of, you know, the whole markdown process and everything. One thing that would be a magical feature for me would be to use Leanpub to distribute the book to other channels, primarily iBooks and kind of Kindle. Not so much. I know how to upload to Kindle, but I literally, you know, today I'm going through my notes because my last book was a few years ago, how to get the book on iBooks, because I forgot about that. And I know I've not gone directly. I've used some other channel for that, but for the life of me, I can't remember how I've done it. So helping distribute the book, maybe on Apple iBooks and other places like that would be a good thing to do. For other people, I do have a process of uploading to Kindle, and it's not that difficult, but maybe, again, automating the Kindle distribution process and helping people get the book out on multiple channels saves time.
Yeah, no, that's true.
Your authors are probably looking for kind of a bigger reach. That would be an interesting thing for me, I guess.
Yeah, thanks very much for that. It's that leads me to observe a couple of things. One is we do have a publish on Amazon service now, which is the paid service. It's kind of expensive, but it's kind of like, look, I want my book in print. I want it on Amazon, and I don't want to think about it, and I don't want to spend any time, and I don't want to have to, and so it's kind of like, give us some money and we'll do that for you with your Leanpub book. So we do have that. When it comes to using other services, like using Leanpub to distribute to other services like that is probably not something we're going to do, at least in the near term. But making articles, showing people how to get your Leanpub book on iBooks is exactly helping people. And like, for anyone wondering, why would we do that? Because like, we make our money selling books. We also have paid standard and pro accounts. And you can use Leanpub for free without publishing your book on Leanpub at all. That's perfectly fine. You can use Leanpub to create your ebook and go and put it on whatever platform you want. And when it comes to distribution as well, one interesting thing, so we've got our Translate AI service now that can translate a Leanpub book into a bunch of different languages. And we were talking to this publishing consultant about it, and he was like, the translation's cool. The fact that I can get 31 landing pages for my book without having to upload it 31 times, like you would do with KDP or Kobo or something like that. Exactly. Well, anyway, yeah, thank you very much for that. I'm going to definitely think about that, because, having articles about like just helping authors, like if you specifically, like, I don't remember how to do iBooks. If we had articles showing people how to do that, then they'd be more likely to use Leanpub as their sort of source of creating their book and then going on.
For like, I don't use this feature, but I know it exists, and I used it before. I had to kind of do some other weird stuff that prevented me from using it for my last book. So, I built some software around it, is to actually kind of use Leanpub to generate an EPUB from Markdown, which is a non-trivial task to do with all the metadata and all the... Mm-hmm. So somebody publishing to Apple iBooks needs an EPUB file. If they have a Word document, they need an EPUB file and with all the metadata and everything, they're very likely to use Leanpub as a way of generating an EPUB file. So you still have them as a user and help them succeed, remove obstacles to their success from maybe the distribution thing is not what you need. Again, my usage is a bit weird when it comes to Leanpub, but it is it's one of the services that I truly love using, and you've done an amazing job building it, and I'm so glad you built it.
Well, thank you very much for the kind words, and thank you very much for using Leanpub as a platform for your latest book, and thank you very much for being on the podcast again. I really appreciate it.
Thanks
and appreciate your time.